Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now, your host, Demeere.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the podcast where we talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And this time I have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you to Dennis Dilday. Hi, Dennis. How are you?
Hi, Wayne. Great. Everything's good.
Excellent. Now, for the people who don't know you just yet, I'm just going to talk about how I got to know you. And I think we met for the first time maybe 20 years ago when you were in Belgium working with our teacher, traveling with him and practicing Tai Chi Chuan with him and learning a lot. And this is from my recollection, and I've been punched in the head a couple of times, so I might be off. But I remember that we were at a seminar and you were there. And the first thing that struck me was that you were taking a lot of notes, which is what nobody else was doing. And being a note taker myself, I was like, interesting. There's somebody who's paying attention to what the teacher is saying, which is always a good thing. And I think we did some pushing hands first. And I did a part of what we call 4 directions. And I used that in a particular way when we're doing freestyle pushing hands. And you asked me, okay, how do you do that? And I said, why, or how, or why do you do it that way, or blah, blah, blah. And I gave an explanation, which I don't remember, which I very much hope that it made sense at the time. And you said, okay, interesting. So that's how you do this. And I could see that you filed it away and that it wasn't gone. And that is always what I look for when I meet people to train with. And it doesn't matter who it is or what style they do, is that the way they approach the system. And the way that they think about learning and the way that they think about practicing and so on, far more than what exactly they do on a technical level, but more their overall approach to things. So that's why I liked you right away. And I've been pretty much following your blog, very silently, very quietly on the background, lurking a little bit. I don't think I commented much throughout the years, but I've been following you for a while now. So, and just to give our listeners a little bit more of a background, so we practice the same style of Tai Chi Chuan, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, but you're also a very experienced chiropractor. So that's me introducing you, but if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself a little bit, let's start with maybe your martial arts background. So what have you done in the past as far as that goes?
Well, when you and I met, it was either in Ostend or in Brussels, and at that point I was about 41 or 2, and I had been playing basketball for 31 years and was no longer able to play basketball due to developing foot problems. And I decided to do Tai Chi. So I had been doing the college Tai Chi class off and on for about 8 years, but I wasn't very happy with the teaching, and I wasn't diligent. And so because I could no longer play basketball, I decided to buy some of those books that he was bringing to the class at the college. And as I read the books written by Dan Doherty and Ian Cameron, I realized that what was being taught in the class wasn't what was in the books. So I had to travel there, and so since I was traveling so far, and then we went to Belgium and France and all those places for all those seminars. That's the big reason why I was taking all the notes, is I wanted to capture as much as I could. Yeah. But I don't really have a martial arts background. Other than that, I went back and forth. I learned the forms. I began practicing the forms and the push hands, the internal strength. And then at some point, Dan said I should start teaching, mostly so that I would have training partners. But with my chiropractic background, most of the people attracted to my Tai Chi classes weren't the kind of people I was really hoping for. So I never really did develop a following of young, fit, athletic, people that wanted to get physical. What I attracted was a bunch of people who wanted free chiropractic advice, and so that was okay. That worked out over time. But I have been a chiropractor for 31 years. I did go to Palmer College of Chiropractic in Iowa. Before that, I was in college. Before that, I was in the service. And I did injure my back in 1980 quite significantly. I mentioned that in that very same blog post you and I were just talking about. I told that story.
Yep.
So I had about 15 years of back pain off and on all the way through college in those first years of chiropractic, and then I got serious about Tai Chi, and when I did get serious about Tai Chi, it began to make a difference. So my interest in Tai Chi developed into an interest in rehabilitation and recovery and preventing re-injury. And at some point, 5 or 6 years ago, there was just a little bit added to that. And it was a big epiphany for me that I could decrease workplace injuries to the back. And so I began to see myself as consulting on preventing back injury, and began working toward doing that. And so now here we are 6 years later. It's kind of interesting. I'm now teaching 4 to 5 classes a week, teaching inside the employer environment, and I'm essentially doing almost what I imagined myself doing, although not getting the big bucks that I was hoping for.
That's how it works.
But that's how it works. But I've seen some back injuries, I've seen some neck injuries, shoulder injuries, knee injuries, hip injuries, and I did figure out a way to prevent them. So what I've been doing is looking for people interested in knowing about that. But prevention is, it's not a big high priority for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's completely right.
What got us started was your blog post and your photograph, and how it exemplified everything I've been talking about for this 6 years now. Every single point of how to bend and lift and squat and I think
you mean the article about that deadlift? Is that the one?
What's that again?
You mean the blog post about the deadlift by that MMA fighter, where I posted a picture of the hip hinge?
Right.
Okay.
You talked about the video of some guy named Ferguson, and I went and looked at that video, and sure enough, I mean, here you have the classic example of how not to do a deadlift.
Yeah, I'm just gonna just for the readers, the listeners, sorry, who don't know that, I'll put a link in the show notes to that blog post of mine. But it's Tony Ferguson, who's a mixed martial arts champion. There was a video of him doing a deadlift, and he had horrible technique, absolutely horrible technique. He was lifting a lot of weight, obviously, but what he was doing to his spine was just, horrendous. And I'm sure you as a chiropractor can appreciate, the damage he was doing a whole lot more than I can. But I was just appalled that somebody was coaching him and letting him get away with that kind of stuff. And I showed a picture of me showing actually a hip hinge to Barry Eisler, who I was teaching a little bit before. I saw that video of Tony doing his deadlift, and we had actually been working on how to hip hinge correctly, how to use it, how to develop a proper deadlift, and use the body mechanics as they're supposed to be. And there's a picture indeed of me showing a deadlift. So that's the blog post you're referring to.
Yeah, for me, it's a funny journey. I remember meeting our Tai Chi teacher, Dan, in London when I first got there, my first trip, the first class, and he says, "Okay, show me what you've got." So I showed him my form, and he said, "Well, it isn't square, and it isn't round, and no one's taught you the knee rule." But he says, by way of a compliment, he said, "But I can see you put a lot of work into it." Anyway, he said, "I can see no one taught you the knee rule." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, I'm a chiropractor. I know all about the knee rule." And he says, "Well, you're breaking it. You're breaking it." And so from that moment on, I began to analyze, and then, of course, he started me from the beginning, teaching me how to do the form correctly, which was very frustrating because I'd spent 8 years, and I'd been doing it basically all wrong for 8 years. And that's an unfortunate.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about the knee roll for the listeners who don't know what that means?
Well, the way to think about the knee rule is anytime you're going to load the knee and bend it, the knee has to stay over the foot. It can go, a little bit toward the front of the foot, maybe to the end of the toes or wherever, but it really doesn't, you just really don't want it to go much beyond that, and you don't want it to come inside toward the other knee.
Yeah.
It's a hinge joint. It's meant just to hinge, really. And
Exactly.
For lots of reasons having to do with flexibility of the hip and lack of training, people ask the knee to do all kinds of things it's not designed to do. So it falls apart. The unfortunate part of that is it doesn't have pain fibers in the cartilage. So when you're in your 20s and 30s and early 40s, you can be destroying your knee without being aware of it. And then when the cartilage is gone, now it's too late and you're more than aware of it.
Exactly. And I think that
introduced me to Tai Chi. He said the only sports injuries commonly associated with Tai Chi is Tai Chi knee. So that's how important it is not to break the knee rule.
Exactly. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see with my own students when they obviously lack the hip flexibility and they're cheating in their stances when they load that knee, especially in the back stance. I see them torquing that knee completely in the wrong direction, and I actually grab their knee and keep it in the right direction. I say, do the move again this time. Mm-hmm. And then they feel how tight their hips are, and the hip fold isn't opening and closing, so they're stuck. And I said, look, you cannot go into a lower stance until you do this right, because you will blow out your knee eventually. It's gonna go. It's not if, it's a matter of when. And
absolutely.
Many students still don't listen to me. They keep doing it. I said, no, you have to fix this. This is really a critical error in the system. As far as your biomechanics are concerned. If you do not fix this, two things are going to happen. Wear and tear. You're going to use up your knee before it's time to go, and it's going to give. And the second thing is you will never be able to get as far as you could in the art, because the biomechanics that we develop only work from the ground up, and that means that knee needs to be in position all the time. And that's why I think the knee rule is so important. I mean, I'm obviously speaking mainly for our style, but proper biomechanics pretty much apply for I wouldn't say everywhere, but for most martial arts, I think it's going to be a really good rule to incorporate. Absolutely, and that's a
great aid to teaching when you can do those cues where you're touching them. That helps them to understand what's going on. Talking only gets you so far.
Exactly.
I definitely over the years, well, just to finish that thought, I mean, the knee rule became a huge issue, and the rest of what we are taught in our system, it was just a matter of just learning. But when it came later, the language of the neutral spine and the hip hinge, which I got from Pavel, I realized that I knew those things. They just hadn't been articulated in that way.
Yeah.
And so learning our Tai Chi, we did learn these things, and then Pavel gave me the language. And from there on, now you're able to talk about it and break it down, and just that little tiny bit of a change in the neutral spine, I think I mentioned to you.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Hugely impacted strength. And like you say, the whole thing works from the ground up. And the body mechanics, I think, applies completely across the board. All the back injuries come from someplace. And when it comes to safety or preventing back injury, it's just an effort to try and keep people from getting into that meat grinder of relief care and rehab and all the problems that you run into there. It's just trying to avoid that.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier that you're working on injury prevention, back injuries, and so on. From your perspective as a chiropractor and with all the experience that you have, what would you consider to be the most important for health, just generally for health for average people, not necessarily martial artists, as far as injury prevention? Are there any quick tips that you could give, like offhand?
Well, we start in the same place. That's a funny thing. It wouldn't matter whether you're starting with I just had a Seahawk in the office a few months ago, and I asked every new patient to show me a squat, and I had to work with him on his neutral spine. And I'm thinking a Seahawk shouldn't need a chiropractor.
So Seahawk, is that like an American football player?
Right.
Okay. Don't forget I'm Belgian.
Sorry, yeah, professional football player.
Seattle Seahawks, right?
You know, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about cops or firemen or ambulance people or the FedEx UPS driver. You watch them move. I know you can do this as well as I. You watch them move, and you realize nobody taught them how to move. Yeah. So first and foremost, people have to be taught how to move. They don't know the knee rule, or what I encounter quite a bit, because I've taken care of professional bodybuilders. They're usually, they're mechanics, or they've got a regular job, but they've competed in bodybuilding. So they know the gym. Yeah. And I was a gym rat for 25 years, and basically following the bodybuilding thought processes of being a gym guy for the first 20 years of that. So you talk to a competitive bodybuilder about their knee rule, because he's a mechanic getting up and down off the ground all the time. And like I say, on the first visit, I say, show me a squat. And then if they don't know how to squat, and if they're like a mechanic, or like work on an airplane, in my town, everybody works on airplanes, and a lot of them complain about destroying their knees because they're working in wings. What they don't realize is getting up and down off the ground and breaking the knee rule 40, 50, 60 times a day is why they're destroying their knees. And so you say that to a guy who should know. This is kind of the frustration. And he says, well, I know the knee rule from the gym. He does the same thing I did to Dan. He said, I know the knee rule from the gym. I said, well, the problem is you got to take the knee rule from the gym to the job. And as soon as he did that, now we could affect the recovery to his back injury. One of the reasons for teaching people how to move properly or breathe or brace or any of that is that they show up at my front door injured and in an episode of back pain. So if you're talking about, well, what's an important thing that a martial artist or, grandpa, grandma, mom, dad, brother, sister could do to prevent back injury, it's learn how to move, learn how to brace. Properly. So we're back to where we started, the knee rule, the hip hinge, and the neutral spine.
Yeah. And as it so happens, these are three of pretty much the most critical elements of the biomechanics of our style. When you just boil it down to basics, these three are going to come back all the time. If you don't do these three properly, you cannot perform our style correctly. In my very humble opinion, I've been training in our style for a long time, but which is just me doing my own thing. Doesn't make me the absolute authority, obviously, but that's when I see the practitioners in our style like Dan and my teacher and a bunch of other people that I consider to be extremely, extremely competent and well trained. You see these three things coming back the whole time. That's what they do very, very well, amongst other things. But you see those things consistently coming back at an extremely high level. And just a quick sidetrack, but that reminds me of an article I read about tennis, and it was about Roger Federer, who was pretty much one of the best in the world for a very long time, and some can still consider him to be at that level. I don't know enough about the sport to comment, but the article went on about biomechanics and movement patterns, and it said that, and I'm making up numbers because it's been too long and I don't remember, but it says that there are 15 different movement patterns in tennis. And the average, top level player is going to master about 10 or 11 of them. And what the author claimed is that Federer actually masters 14. He can do all 14 of them almost perfectly every single time he moves. And the 15th one he can still do pretty damn well. And that's what I see is that when we're talking about, the neutral spine and knee rule and so on, is that when you look at Dan and Patrick and a bunch of other people in our style, and obviously in other style as well, when you look for those core components in the body mechanics and not just look at, are they present, but to what degree of perfection are they present. And they're fundamental elements of what you need to be able to do, but then there are levels of skill in how different people can actually perform them consistently in every movement. Not just once or twice, not just when they really have to, but without thinking. And it's just there. And that's what I think is kind of like, what you said, is that if you want to avoid injuries and so on. Start with getting these 3 things correctly ingrained in your body mechanics. But my point is, and always, don't just stop there. If you can find an activity where you can keep going, but also keep working on making those neutral spine and the rest, those big 3 items or concepts, if you will, make these really a part of something that you keep on improving on, as opposed to just accepting, okay, now I've got it, so I can forget about it.
Exactly. Everybody wants to move on to the good stuff.
Yeah.
And just like you said, when you talk about the next thing, once you deal with those, is to talk about pushing and pulling. Well, if you're going to talk about pushing and pulling and you don't have a neutral spine, the knee rule and the hip hinge in place, well, your pushing and pulling won't amount to much.
Exactly. And I completely agree. One of the ways in which I teach neutral spine to push is just, you see people doing all sorts of stuff. I said, look, okay, stop. Go over there, put your hands against the wall, and pretend that you're pushing a car forward. Everybody goes into neutral spine. They incline the spine, they stack up their joints, and they put the legs in the proper position, and they push from the ground up through a neutral spine with perfect posture. Everybody. Barring people with back injuries or what have you. But, and I use that all the time. So look, your body knows how to do this. You're getting in the way of your own body by insisting that you need to keep a vertical spine, which obviously then, hollows out the lumbar spine, creates other problems. So look, let your body take care of it. Just the way that you approach it is going to make a huge difference.
Well, and going back to that tennis player, Federer, one of the main benefits of that is that you get the longevity. And that longevity, obviously he's got the genes, he's got the recuperative power and all that. And probably low numbers of injuries. But why does he have low numbers of injuries? Because he moves right. And because he moves right, he's also got the longevity.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things in martial arts as well is that, we're going to get to the part where we talk about injuries, obviously, is if you can move properly, then it's going to make a huge difference in how long you can practice martial arts at a high level or whatever level, you want to do. Which kind of brings me to the next question. So, again, speaking as a chiropractor, from your point of view, specifically for martial artists, what would you consider to be the most important elements for them to just get the highest possible performance?
Well, I think it's the same for them as it is for many other categories of people who are, what shall we say, type A's or alpha males or competitive. Whatever you want to use, you kind of know the class of people we're talking about. Yeah. But not really just them. But most people's biggest issue is the issue of progressions. And so once again, they get away with a lot in their 20s and 30s, but this business of progressions always trips people up. Basing how you are doing on how you feel, instead of having a training record that you use to measure where you're at and some idea of where you want to go and the steps between here and there. It's those steps that get pretty much everybody in trouble, and oftentimes we don't know we crossed that line until it's too late. Obviously, the martial artist and the gym guy and the athlete, we're more in touch with it, but our ego is just as big a problem as ever. And frequently, it takes a long time to be willing to wait. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point. And obviously, like you said, you were in the gym a lot, following, the training methods of bodybuilding and so on. I did a lot of strength training when I was younger, and I trained really hard during my competitive career. And then obviously afterwards, because I like training, it was never a chore for me. I loved training and pushing myself that way. So obviously went into a lot of overtraining, and that is one of the points. And I just want to check with you if you have any, additional insights that you can put to that. So I've talked about my issues with chronic compartment syndrome and all the rehab that I'm still doing after my surgery 3 years after. Turned out that I have actually quite a bad body for martial arts, especially for the high impact stuff that I used to do. And do a lot less nowadays. For instance, it turned out that I actually have a I wouldn't call it substandard spine, but it's a little bit less strong than the average spine, which is something you don't necessarily think when you look at me, because I'm fairly muscular. But my neurosurgeon, he looked at my MRI and said, look, here's the thing. When I look at the shape of your spine, when I look at the nerve canal right there in the middle, where pretty much your whole nervous system is going through, when I look at a bunch of different things, what I see is that you have a spine that can actually function and lead you throughout your entire life. However, it is not meant for the kind of high stress training that you put it through. And he says, but that would be one thing. But he said, when I look at your muscle mass that you have, and I used to have a little bit more when I talked to him about 4 years ago, he said, look, what you have is a really tiny foundation, and you put a skyscraper on top of it. That foundation cannot carry it. So you're going to have to stop lifting heavy, which I did. You can do bodyweight exercise, and you need to maintain strength overall, work on your stabilizers, and just connect your body, keep it very well connected. But you cannot, you have to break down that skyscraper that you built, because that's going to break your spine, which I did. And I can attest to how much better I feel now a couple of years afterwards, when I stopped all the heavy lifting and did a bunch of bodyweight training and stretching and a bunch of different stuff that I didn't used to do. And being very honest, when I was in my 20s, which I thought that kind of stuff was kind of stupid and lame for people who weren't strong enough to do the stuff that, that the real men were doing, obviously.
Yeah.
I can see that. You probably know what I mean.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah. And it's interesting because without more detail, we don't need to go in detail about your particular situation, but whether he was referring to alignment or what he was referring to, it reminds me of the way in the old days, let's just say the 60s and 50s, they used to talk about body types and endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. They don't really do that too much anymore. I think they decided it wasn't measurable enough or reliable or whatever, so now they talk a little bit differently, but he might be referring to that, and occasionally you see that as a pretty good as a big issue. But it reminds me of I'm not exact. I kind of lost what tripped me over to that, but it's a very, very important question to ask. If you're training at something difficult and you've achieved a level of fitness on, and here's my classic example, but we could fill in the blanks with anything, but my classic example is our internal strength exercises. Say you had a set of exercises and they were pretty damn difficult. In fact, they were very difficult, and it took you quite a long time to be able to actually do them. And then you can do them, and you say, okay, well, my fitness level is that I can do those exercises. Well, that's not really the goal. The goal is do them, I remember Dan saying, you won't make progress if you only do them 3 days a week. Well, the idea then is you're going to have to do them more than 3 and approaching 4 or 5. And so now you're saying, okay, I'm doing this thing now 4 or 5 days a week, which by, a loose definition of daily, what's being trained? What's being trained if the exercise, the workout isn't different, but now you're doing something every day that you weren't even able to do for, let's say, 8 months. It took you 8 months to build up to the point where you could do this hour workout, 50-minute workout, and it practically killed you. And now you're doing it 3, 4, 5 days a week. What changed? That takes us back to your question about overtraining. The overtraining, if you're not overtraining, but you're training, what's being trained? I think that's a huge question. I think people need to contemplate that and spend time on it. Most people don't do enough of the same thing every day or the same thing several days a week anymore. It's not popular to do that. But in Tai Chi it is. And in rehab, you might think of it in terms of rehab, or you might think of it in terms of progressions. And you contemplate those for a while, and I think people will find something in there for themselves.
I think that's a great answer, and it really approaches one of the fundamentals that I see in training is that you have to have a purpose. You have to know which way you're going, or you're just blundering around in the dark, which can be fun, which isn't useless either.
Right.
But you're probably not going to get anywhere near where you could go if you only have a clear direction, or at least a vague direction to begin with. Of where you're heading. Like you said, what are you training? What are you doing? What's going on? As opposed to, well, I'm doing this because I always did this, or my teacher said I need to do this, and you just do it and stop thinking about it. Well, my point is then that it's your life, man. I mean, you do whatever you like, but you're responsible for you. Your teacher isn't. So maybe start, like you said, think about it. What are you doing and what's being trained?
Well, that's very good. That's very important. And it takes us to that other question. You asked the question, your experience teaching the art. And I wrote on a journey of discovery because I was such a poor teacher for such a long time. And when you do something really poorly for a long enough period of time, you get to study it and think about it and analyze it a little bit. And what you normally discover is that you're the problem. And it's funny how Tai Chi teaches us so much about life, and then we can apply the Tai Chi to all the different aspects of our life. And this is a good example. I came back from London. I was all excited, looking for people to wrestle with and do push hands. I started teaching classes. I thought I would do it exactly like my teacher did it. I wanted to tell people what I wanted to teach them. But these people, and the reason I got to compare it was I have a whole career of doing the same kind of thing with patients. They show up in your life. They have their own agenda. They want certain things, and the last thing they want is to be told. They might want to be taught, but they don't want to be told. And we need to be, as teachers, as a doctor, you're spending a lot of your time trying to teach. We have to become sensitive. I mean, we're supposed to be learning sensitivity, and we use the term listening, and all that implies if we're doing that, then we need to figure out how to help them in a way that is meaningful for them. And what I mean by that is we have to meet them where they are. That's one way of thinking about it. And we have to give them what they need at that time. Sometimes, and that has to be balanced with the fact that we work for them. They can fire us anytime they want. And they do. They do. But everybody's different, and they don't all get the same thing. And yet, you go to one of our Tai Chi classes, it looks like everybody's getting the same thing. But they don't really. And when you do start with the fundamentals I explain everything we do in Tai Chi in terms of what they're going to be doing when they get out and go get in the car and drive to the office or go do whatever it is they do in the rest of their life. And whether it's breathing or bracing or how to move or pushing or pulling something, they're more receptive to that. And as far as this whole business of preventing injuries goes, with patients and the transfer from relief into rehabilitation, the standards I use are, here's what normal people ought to be able to do. If you're interested, what we ought to do is see if you can do those things and then work toward normal. In my office and with most of the Tai Chi students, that's a lofty enough goal.
True.
And so once, when you get there, or when you're working with somebody that's already there, now you can talk about, okay, where would you go from there? What do you want? And maybe we can talk about how to do that. It's fun now because now I have kind of evolved through those phases where, when the teacher's trying to put their ego into it and trying to get their agenda satisfied, it's not so harmonious. And now that I care less about all that, it seems that you can be much more useful. However, getting back to the whole issue of trying to prevent injuries, we still live in a culture, and I can probably include the guys in Belgium, where we measure ourselves by how we feel and not by how we function. So if we feel pretty good, we think we are pretty good until something sets us back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a few things that I can say. That I would say in response, and I've been a teacher since I was 18 years old because my then teacher let me, started me with doing the warm up, and then I would teach half the class, and eventually I would teach full classes very early on. And I wasn't really the best teacher at all, but I got a lot of practice doing stuff wrong. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, like you said, you start thinking about, okay, how can I do a better job, and why am I not getting through to this person, or why can't I make him understand what he needs to do? So I started learning about teaching, obviously, very, very slowly, bit by bit, and hopefully getting better at it. But one of the main things that really clicked for me is when I managed to shift my mindset and accept that the students that I'm working with are in training for the same reasons that I do. So I shouldn't hold them to the same standard as I hold myself. Mm-hmm. And I was very much into the training, and I loved it. And when my teacher, and that's why, when I saw you taking notes, why I connected with what you were doing, and you would just simply ask people, like, how do you do this? And you'd write it down, and then you'd practice it, which is the key part. I remember my first class with my teacher, and we did freestyle push hands, which is a sort of wrestling for the people who don't know what that means. I was a heavyweight. I was an experienced fighter on the competitive circuit. I had some titles under my belt, and I thought I was pretty good. And just the smallest guy in class, who I was outweighing by at least 50 pounds, he was throwing me around just like I was a baby. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? So the harder I tried, the faster I ended up on the floor. I'm like, okay, this is nonsense. This doesn't make any sense at all. So I tried again, and I would end up on the floor. And you know what that feels like, right?
Well,
especially when you work with Dan.
That. You're talking about Philip, right?
No. It's another Patrick, the smaller one. I don't know if you met him.
Patrick. I meant to say Patrick. Patrick was the only guy of all the seminars I went to with Dan and all the places we went and all those trips over there. He was the only guy that I never moved his feet one time ever.
Yeah, I know that feeling. For the people who don't know, Patrick is my teacher, Patrick Couder, who's my main teacher, and Dan is obviously his teacher, and my teacher as well as being the head instructor of our style. So, and Patrick is extremely talented. He's a really amazing martial artist who's at the same time extremely humble. Yeah. And doesn't look for the limelight, and people have no idea how good he is. And I can attest to that, having tried the same thing like you said, trying to just make his feet move, and it doesn't go all that well.
No, it's just frustrating. And like you say, he's compared to you, he's pretty.
He's much lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's tall. He's a little bit taller than I am.
Yeah.
But he's much lighter than I am.
The definition of wiry, we would say.
Exactly. And it's one of his students actually who was much smaller than I am, much lighter, but who had been training in our style for a while, and he was just throwing me around. And my first reaction was obviously my ego was bruised.
Yeah.
But the second reaction, which I'm very glad for, that came right after that, was like, if I can learn to do what that guy does, and he's not even the best guy in the room because the teacher is even better than him, if I can do that at my weight, I'm going to be throwing around people left and right.
Exactly.
So I'm going to learn this stuff.
Together.
Yeah. So then, and that's why I'm like, okay, this isn't about my ego. This doesn't mean that the previous stuff that I was doing is bad. It's just, this is a different level. This is something else. I need to learn this. And I started practicing. And I practiced really hard because I was afraid that I would forget stuff. Mm-hmm. So I would come home from class and I would practice some more so that next class I wouldn't have to start from scratch, because I'm a slow learner. People think I pick all this stuff up easily, but it's not. It takes a while for me. I need a lot of reps. And I would do the reps, and then I would come to class ready to learn some more, and I would get, the same thing, get home and keep training. And that mindset is something that brings us back to the teaching part, is, for the longest time, it was very difficult for me to accept that not everybody has that mindset of, okay, the teacher says, practice this, you go out and do it. You don't just whatever it, you just, like teacher says, you need to practice this. Okay, then I'm going to practice this. Period. There's no question. Not like blind obedience, but more in the sense of that, look, if you want to make progress, I want you to do this exercise like every day for 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll see what happens. And this is the kind of stuff I tell my own students, like, you've got a problem with your hip hinge. This is what I like you to do. Do this every day for 5 minutes. That's it. Done. No more. And you'll see the difference in less than a week. And I can tell, obviously, who does that and who doesn't. And then I'm like, look, if you don't want to do it, it's fine. But you're limiting what you'll be able to learn. And there's some stuff that you will never learn, because you've got this issue that you don't want to put the time in to fix. And accepting that kind of stuff was what made me a better teacher. Just not holding people to the same standard as I do. There are limits. There are certain levels that they cannot go lower than that. There's a minimum that they need to achieve for basic competency in our style. And if they don't want to do that, then I can't help them. Then I tell them, like, look, as long as you don't fix this, I can't teach you anything else, because I don't want to be responsible for you ending up in the hospital when you mess up your back or when you mess up your knee. So we're limited.
I think that's important, actually, and it ties into that whole balance of caring too much, or the student making choices. And so you look at the student, and you it's like I've said this to students, to classes, it's okay, there's no judgment, and but if you can't, don't, or won't do it the way that it's being taught, then at some point we'll quit trying to teach it to you. And you've learned what you've learned, and you're coming for what you're coming for, and you're getting out of it what you want to get out of it. I think we kind of have to be okay with that. But they're going to hear me rant and rave about the knee, the hip hinge, and a few other things, and they're going to hear me harp on the foot placement and how to move, because, as you said earlier, everything is built on from the ground up, and how we move our feet and where we put our feet and how we step and do the feet part. I don't leave any of that up to chance. One of my first impressions when I was watching Dan, and also I managed to talk him out of a video that first time I went over there. He informed me he no longer sold videos, but I wasn't going to be around, and all I had was his book that was the square form, and I talked him out of the video. Well, you watch him do the form, and even in 1980s, the impression I got was machine-like precision.
Exactly. And
when I watch his talk, and so I got to move around with him at all these different seminars and watch his people, and his top people, they're the same. Nothing is incidental or accidental. Everything is precise. And so my students have to hear me repeat that, and I'll continue to correct them for quite a long time. But if they just simply aren't interested, then I'll quit talking about it, and I'll just kind of get over it.
Yeah.
But they can't move on. And it's kind of a shame, because if they're doing things that are going to that are kind of damaging, then I just coach them to not bend their knees very much. And that way, it'll be a little less damaging, but it's a very interesting process. I teach a college class that's, so the kids come in, they're college kids, and they're going to be there for 12 weeks. And they're a captive audience. In the regular gym classes and other places, they don't have to come if they don't want to. So if they come for a few times and something about it they don't like, they just quit coming. But in the college class, they're stuck. And it is
they got to show
the most profound metamorphosis to watch these people who have no real interest. They just want a credit usually. And they come in, they have just some mild little interest brought them in, but you work with them and you teach them and you go along and you show them things and they're training and they're practicing. It's a 2-hour class, so they get plenty of exercise. And at the end of 6, 8, 10 weeks, they are astounded and amazed. And they are some very impressive people doing some very impressive things. And they're just shocked. And it's just it's amazing to watch that. And so what the message there is, if the student just sticks with it and does what they're told, if they have a decent instructor, then they can make a lot of progress. Yeah,
I agree with that. And as a kind of a follow-up on what you just said, when you look at those people when they're in your class, and especially in the beginning, what would you say is what they do wrong as far as moving their bodies and performance and all that, or misunderstandings they have about how the body works from your perspective?
Well, other than what we've already talked about, most people are doing some variation of stress breathing. So they really, they don't understand how to breathe, and so therefore they don't understand how to relax, and so therefore they're very tense. And, that's the play. They don't, people are, and this is a frustrating thing about preventing back injury. When you look at people who should know and don't, you wonder, and then you discover that they don't know, and they think they do know, and so they're not really interested in hearing from somebody else tell them something that they think they already know all about. It's very, very frustrating to discover that they don't really know how to do it.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about stress breathing, could you, for the listeners, give a little bit of an insight into that? Because I know what you're talking about, but just a little bit of an introduction to that.
Well, the extreme example, and so the extreme example is kind of like the hyperventilation. But what trainers are trained to look for is that when a person is being taught how to do something that they don't know how to do, they focus and they concentrate and they get tense and they begin to breathe short up in their chest, and the opposite of the correct way to breathe. And so as soon as you see that, you know that they need to be taught how to breathe in the first place, which they actually probably don't know how to breathe.
Yep.
And so when you put them under a little bit of stress, then they really don't know how to breathe. So now if they were singers or if they were certain types of athletes or various other things, somewhere along the line they probably learned how to breathe enough to get by, and they played their sport or they did whatever they did. But if they actually needed to induce relaxation, and a lot of times people are conscious of their tension and their stress, and they wish they could induce relaxation. Well, if that's something they're interested in, or they want to do Tai Chi, then they need to learn how to breathe. And so we point it out to them, make them aware that they're stress breathing, but more important probably is we simply take them back to the beginning and say, this is how to breathe, and teach them how to do abdominal breathing and use a few different tricks to get them to be able to have a sensual kinesthetic experience of proper diaphragmatic breathing. And then just harp on it from then on and ask them to practice it and talk to them about ways to get to the point. I mean, it took me 4 years, at least 4 years, before I spontaneously was breathing correctly. And that's 4 years of trying. So I'm a slow learner too. But, the importance of breathing, I like to point out nowadays, that this business of preventing or addressing back injuries or other injuries, the business of safety or trying to prevent those injuries, and the business of self-defense or now I'm actually involved with the emergency management community here and disaster response. These things all cross over. It's just a continuum. They're the exact same stuff. In fact, it was hilarious to me. Our local emergency response community formed a book club, and the first book they asked us to read might have been the second book. I'm not sure. I read the first book. And I think I mentioned this to you, a book called, the title is The Unthinkable. It was written by Amanda Ripley, where she talks about all these things, but it didn't take her very long to talk about fear, and it didn't take her very long to talk about breathing, and the breathing that they talked about being the solution for all these, for the military and the police force and all these disaster preparedness first responder people.
Yeah.
Is the breathing that we learn when we meditate or do Tai Chi. That breathing is the breathing that they use to address the fear component and to deal with disasters. So here we are talking about an extreme, and you say, well, how do you get to where you can deal with that extreme? Well, you start by learning how to breathe correctly. And again, this is why I think Tai Chi is such a perfect, it's so perfect. It spans that entire spectrum. They said everybody wants to talk about whether Tai Chi is a martial art. Well, yeah, self-defense. There's about a 1% chance of you getting in a fist fight, but there's a 99% chance you're going to have to defend yourself against stress, even if it's just sitting at the computer. There's a 99% chance you're going to have to defend yourself against falling and accidents, car accidents, and a number of other things. So while it'll help you learn how to have practical self-defense skills, and I believe it will, that's one reason for doing it. Another reason for doing it is you don't want to injure your back, and you want to be healthy.
Yeah. And I think that, I'm just thinking about, we've been talking for a little while about a bunch of stuff which is relating to health and injury prevention and biomechanics. And I can imagine listeners thinking now like, okay, so what does this all have to do with me, being able to defend myself when a guy wants to punch my head off? And I'm going to quickly tie this all back together and just a couple of examples. So like I said, from our style's perspective, you work from the ground up to develop your biomechanics. And I mentioned that a guy who was much lighter than I was, and physically speaking, just raw power and muscular strength, he was no match for me. I could have picked him up and put him upside down, but I couldn't push him off balance. So it wasn't a matter of strength. When you look at the way we do body mechanics in our style, and like you said, it needs to transfer into everyday life, what you practice, just like the Seahawk you had in your office when he does a perfect squat, it needs to transfer into everything else he's doing. For us, a bunch of the mechanics that we do, if you do them correctly, consistently, you will obviously have less injuries because you move better. You will also have to expend less energy to get the things done you want to do, physically speaking. But at the same time, it allows you to generate a whole lot more power than you would just looking at how strong your muscles are, which directly ties into the self-defense context. And at the same time, it allows you to absorb force coming at you so much more. But also, and this is a little bit of a tricky part, you can get away with a whole lot more because you've got a very layered foundation in your body mechanics. Meaning that if you've got, picking a number, 10 components that are critical to your body mechanics. And if you have very good control of all 10 of them, they're working at, let's say, 90 to 95% efficiency all the time. If one of those doesn't work anymore for whatever reason, an injury or something goes wrong, or the guy hits you in the arm and all of a sudden it messes up everything else, well, you still got those 9 others are still working really well. If on the other hand you have body mechanics based on raw strength, and that strength goes away for whatever reason, could be hurt, you could get injured, you could just be tired, you could be sick, you could have the flu when you're attacked, it could be a bunch of things, then you've got nothing else. There's just the raw strength. And that's why I think being safe, having good body mechanics, staying injury-free, and doing all the things that, like you said, transfer pretty much to any field are of equal importance. And like you said, if you might be in a fight maybe once or twice in your life, for some people it's going to be a lot more. For some people it might be never. But you will actually have to try and stay healthy for as long as you can, remain injury-free, have a good spine, have good knees, and so on. So why not combine the both at the same time? If you can find an art that does all those things at the same time, then it's all interconnected, and it doesn't get much better than that, in my opinion. And different arts have different takes on that, but the point is still the same. You're as a friend of mine says, that the kind of training that you do for your martial arts shouldn't ruin your body. Because if it's self-defense, you're the first guy attacking your body by breaking it down in your training, then there's something wrong. If you're training to become a crippled, that's not self-defense.
I think you're absolutely right. It's once again, like I said, I spent 25 years in the gym following the bodybuilder's creed, but that was not a healthy choice, and so I made all the mistakes a guy could make in the gym as well. When it comes to the martial arts, they're like most everybody. They're going to have injuries from time to time. So you mentioned those different aspects. Well, with Tai Chi, and I don't know if this is a sales pitch for Tai Chi, but it's just the case that whether you're talking about Tai Chi or just training, you need to be able to train around your injuries. I mean, my favorite response to how are you doing is I'm in between injuries, and I love it when I can say that.
That's true.
But I have an illustration that I think is an example. So here I began teaching. It's kind of funny. It's a 25 years, and I'm back. And now guess who is the teacher of the Tai Chi class at the college where I very first took my first class? Right, I am. And teaching the class, by the way, as you can imagine, was by far the easiest part. But in one of the 20 emails a day I was getting, there was an offer for a Tai Chi class. For a self-defense class for the employees of the college. Punching, hitting, escapes, etc., and a bunch of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm the Tai Chi teacher, and I'm just too curious not to go. I'm just curious, what is going to be taught in a 2-hour self-defense class to a bunch of college employees? And it was kind of surreal. There's always an ongoing comedy in my head anyway, but I show up. There's a couple of guys there. One's probably not 40 at all. The other guy's mid-40s. They're both wearing tight polo shirts and, paramilitary type khaki pants. And these two guys start the class, and they start off by saying how this whole thing about teaching self-defense to the community is in its infancy. And which, of course, you and I both know is not quite accurate. But they spend the first 45 minutes of the first hour talking about their extensive background with military and all that sort of stuff. And so they're just very highly qualified, and they do it. And then they go into a nice, really good discussion about awareness. And they talk about the color codes of awareness. A guy named Cooper wrote a book, and they all talk like that. And it was excellent. It was very, very good. And the mindset and the philosophy of all that, they talked about all that. And in there they mentioned the self-defense tactics, or even the business of awareness, had to be trained. And they said, well, you need 10,000 repetitions to acquire this so-called muscle memory, whatever words you and I might use. That's the words they use. You know what I'm talking about. The 10,000 reps. Okay, so then the A ended by they showed people how to get away from somebody grabbing your wrist with one hand. Okay, so I left and came back the next time. And the next time they talked about something more about the mindset and more about how people should deal with these people that they encounter. And they talked about something, you might know all about this. I'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of Arthur Cooper or the Color Code of Awareness, and I'd never heard of OODA. But OODA is an acronym for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And they said this is all the holy grail in the self-defense community and the law enforcement community and all that stuff. And they spent a bunch of time talking about that. And they then went on to have us hit a focus pads, and showed us a couple of escapes. But in the process of talking about it, the one guy said, well, my problem right now is I haven't been working for 3 months because I broke my hand in 3 places punching a guy. He'd already spent quite a bit of time talking about, soft against hard and hard against soft and how, you shouldn't punch guys. But he was off work for 3 months because he punched a guy. And later he was sitting on top of a gal. They were trying to teach her how to use a wrestling move to get him off of her. And the other guy says, well, maybe you ought to let me do that because of your bad shoulder. And, this illustrates a bunch of stuff. I mean, you can hear all the different things illustrated here. You got a whole bunch of women showing up for a 2-hour self-defense class. What are they thinking they're going to learn? You got 2 guys who in the end are trying to sell their self-defense courses. Because in the end, if you're going to get the 10,000 reps, they want you to come to all their classes to get the 10,000 reps. But Tai Chi and the training that most martial arts have teaches you the awareness. And so that awareness gets you a long ways. And they can learn that in the first, well, not the first, but early classes in Tai Chi. They're learning awareness. And at various levels of working with the form, peripheral vision and awareness is what's being taught. So I just thought it was an interesting, I just thought it was interesting. And in fact, I'm composing a little thing, to the employees of the college, inviting them to the Tai Chi class I teach. Because if they're going to get any confidence in any of it, whether it's breathing or movement or developing any kind of muscle memory in any kind of an effective tactical technique, they're going to need to first unlearn usually what they know and practice. And where are they going to get that? Tai Chi class. Yeah. I think it's, I don't know about where you're at, but everybody's talking about these things now all the time. In fact, I almost broke out laughing. In the 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was, everything had the words boot camp attached to it. And then for a long time, everything had the word tactical attached to it. And now everything has the word warrior attached to it. Well, this guy, the older of these 2 guys, he managed to put together a sentence that went, warrior mindset of the warrior tactical community. Well, hell, I almost couldn't stop laughing. This is kind of where we're at nowadays.
So I'm going to quickly explain for the people, obviously, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about now is self-evident for us because we've been in our styles for so long. But one of the key components of doing our form correctly is Yi. Chinese term called Yi, which means rough translation intent. There needs to be a certain specific intent, and I would try to explain that sometimes as like a mindset, but it's not just that. It becomes quite complicated if you want to give a thorough explanation. But the way, focus, mindset, concentration, it's a blend of different things in the way that I like to explain it. And it is very easy to see in certain aspects, and one of them is the eyes. First of all, where you're looking at in the form, and then also the type of gaze that you have, which becomes very woo-woo for some people, but it isn't. It's very practical. It's no nonsense. And one of the key things that you're supposed to be practicing is your peripheral vision. And that's what with Dan, with our teacher, I remember several times during seminars where he mentioned that, this is, you do it like this, and then you practice your peripheral vision. And then he'd show an application where that peripheral vision is actually critical to surviving the assault, because not everything is going to come at you straight in front. You're going to be attacked from all sides. It's going to be from a bizarre angle, and you're going to have to fight from there. You don't get to go to whatever ready position and face the attack. No. Punch comes at you. You're not ideally positioned. Thanks to all that work you do on your peripheral vision, you actually spotted movement from that side and hopefully reacted instinctively and in time. And then the whole body mechanics comes back into play, because if you've got really good body mechanics and you train correctly, and you build your way up to training under stress, adrenal stress, and so on, then you've got a pretty good shot that when that sucker punch comes in and you only saw this flash of a movement in your peripheral vision of actually moving out of the way with good body mechanics, and because they're good, you can actually move quicker and in balance, even when you're surprised, and actually avoid that first blow knocking you unconscious, and actually get into the fight.
Exactly.
And defend yourself.
Exactly.
And that's where all that stuff ties together, which is, from the outside, people just see you moving slowly, moving slowly doing the form, but there's so much more that needs to be in that. And like you mentioned, when you see the video of Dan doing the form many, many years ago, his first long form video that he did, which I don't think is available anymore, the intent is very clearly visible in the way that he moves. And any other form that I've seen him do throughout the years, it was always there. And like you say, the top guys in our system, there's no woo-woo Tai Chi to be found anywhere near what they're doing. It's all very focused, and the intent is there, and the self-defense aspect is an integral part of that. I would even go as far to say is that if you're not working on the self-defense aspect integrated in everything you do, a lot of what you're supposed to be learning, you won't learn. Because like you said, we talked about breathing, stress breathing, and then we're talking about adrenaline, then we're talking about how the adrenal reflex is triggered into your brain. Then we're talking about brain chemistry, brain function, all the effects that has on the human body, and everything we do with the breathing, with the practice, and so on to actually control that and actually prime our bodies to be able to handle that kind of stuff, which is obviously, it's good for your health. I totally agree with that. But it actually prepares you for working under adrenal stress as well in an indirect fashion in many different ways, which is a long discussion that I'm not going to go into now. But I'm just pointing this out to the listeners because a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about now might seem unrelated to self-defense. And for us, being in this style for a long time, it's very evident that it's all connected, and from the outside, people don't necessarily see it. So that's, like I said, the intent is very important, and peripheral vision is a key component about that. So that's a long explanation. I'm trying to tie all the apparently loose ends together for the listeners, so it makes more sense that what we're all talking about, even though we talk about injury prevention and health and biomechanics, it's all directly related to self-defense.
It's exactly the same, and I'm actually quite a bit. I'm looking forward to the book you're writing on the boxing, because boxing was my first love, and it's a there's all these classic examples as you look back through your life of how you kind of were building up to where you are now, and now you can use this understanding you have now to analyze what you've done in the past. I had when I was 16, about 16 or 15, I went to work for my cousin in what used to be called the service station, but he had been a 1967 Golden Gloves boxing champion for the state of Washington, and so he was going to teach me how to box, and I remember, because pain helps you remember things. The very first thing he did after teaching me how to sweep out the shop and change oil and wash a windshield, pump gas, was he found the biggest bolt that he could find with the biggest nut on it. He handed it to me, and he said, here's how you do a jab. He taught me how to do jabs and crosses and hooks and stuff. And he said, you need to do 500 jabs every day when you come to work. Before you leave, you got to do 500 jabs. And before somewhere down the road, you need to be able to do 500 in a row. And so you talk about muscle memory. And in those days, I was 15, 16, I just did what I was told. And you know what? You end up with a pretty reliable jab.
Yeah.
And the fundamental movements in boxing, they also come from the ground.
Yeah.
When the students come to a Tai Chi class, and these other martial artists that might be listening, they're either teachers or they're students. Sometimes the students don't really believe that they can achieve certain things. They just can't see themselves doing it. And other times they don't get the opportunity to have the basic stuff applied to the self-defense. So we always talk about how it connects. That's why I use the words generate force. They know that's code for whether you're pushing a grocery cart or, lifting somebody to throw them up over your back. Whatever it is, it's the body mechanics to push or pull and generate force. And I help them understand where that's coming from. But also when we teach them 7-star step and we talk to them about what all's being developed there, and we do the running thunder fist drill, we talk about that. The muscle memory of doing the repetitions. And so all of the things we've talked about for the last hour and a half now almost still apply. You look in the mirror at the guys behind you doing the drill, and you can see the ones that are paying attention, that practice, that listen, that want to do it your way, and you can see the guys that still want to do it their way. And so you're teaching the new guys and telling them, you're repeating for the umpteenth time for the rest of them, and then you show them how that ties right into 7-star step, ties right into these other things. And then I think it becomes effective and real and transferable. Otherwise, and one of the main things we have to do, I'm not going to badmouth any other styles. And one of the things, I made a calculated decision. Because I got into Tai Chi in my 40s, I couldn't do what I had always done before. I couldn't analyze everything there was and pick the good stuff. I went looking for what I thought was the good stuff. I luckily found Dan, and I said, well, this is good enough for me, and it certainly seems complete enough for me. So I'm not going to go out and try and decide if he's right or wrong or this is good or bad compared to every other Tai Chi thing there is. In fact, I'm going to categorically shut out everything else, and I'm going to focus on this. Well, that was a pretty smart move because it's a pretty complicated and chaotic world. And as a result, now, when other people want to talk to me, I can understand our stuff better as I talk to them about their stuff. It's a little bit, and it's really, to me, the same. And you're the same kind of guy, so it's all just fun and exercise. But when a chiropractor meets a massage therapist, an orthopedist, or a physical therapist, or a neurologist, and you want to start having a conversation about stuff, you are talking about the same stuff, but you bring to it a little different language. And so trying to communicate in spite of the differences in language and all the baggage you brought, right? You each got a bunch of baggage. And so depending on your ego and your attitude, you got to kind of filter through the baggage and try and communicate using these different languages. To me, that's hilariously fun. And it's a way to have somebody say, okay, well, here's what I do. Okay, well, great. And that's not what we do. This is what we do. And I'm not judging too much one way or the other, but anybody can see if somebody's breaking the knee rule.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I say to this, I say to the students, I say, if you see me doing something other than what I'm telling you to do, then you point it out and let's talk about it.
Exactly.
I don't want to be
and that's how you learn.
Something creep in that I didn't know was creeping in.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just to point out an example of how this kind of stuff can work, one of the drills we do is called Fu Yang, which means bow down and look up. And that's what you do in the exercise. And you go into a front stance where you lean all the way forward. Then you're going to bow down from your waist as you shift into a back stance. And from that back stance, you're going to look up by leaning all the way backwards with your spine. And basically your head is looking up at the sky. And when you look at what that does, it does the hip hinge that we've talked about. You're going to get a deep stretch into your whole anterior chain. You're going to strengthen the core muscles. You're going to coordinate your entire body and so on. And it really, it's a pretty intense drill, physically speaking, because you're going to do deep stances into full extension in that upward-looking movement. So it's quite intense. A lot of people, have to do like 20, 30 reps. They get tired, and then you've got at least 20 more to go. But here's the thing. What it also does is it very much strengthens your core. So one of the things it does, it allows you to use upper body evasion and move your head and body around when somebody swings at you. But the other thing it does is actually reinforces one of the flinch responses, which is and you see this almost everywhere, when something comes at your stomach, let's say somebody tries to punch you in the stomach or what have you, and it's actually a surprise. People see it coming, but it's still a surprise move. They flinch by pulling their hips back. And almost invariably, what they do is do so with a straight spine and hip hinge. And that is actually the movement we use in an application of strengthening that movement in the exercise. But then in the application, we obviously combine it with a parrying or blocking movement and then striking back at the same time. And I did a video on that a while ago on Facebook. And it's actually going from an instinctive reflex that we have to defend ourselves, and then drilling that into specific ways to improve those mechanics and make them stronger, while at the same time getting all these health benefits and biomechanical benefits. And that's just one example of also, like, when you look at that from a chiropractic point of view, you're going to see certain things, certain dynamics. When an orthopedist is going to look at that, he's going to see how the body moves and see different things. And when I put on my self-defense instructor hat, what I see is that you're using a flinch response, and it all works.
Yeah, it's an amazing example of how Tai Chi is so deep, and there's so much going on. You can't appreciate it until, you're just always appreciating more and more and more. Earlier, we were talking about training peripheral vision. Well, when you're new, when you're learning the form, that's the last thing, that you've got time to think about. But you're supposed to practice. And so you learn how to, it's just like you said, you go to class, you learn, you go practice, you come back, correction is made, something new is added, you go back and practice. And because you practice and practice and practice, you get more and more and more out of it. One of my favorite lines, my favorite statement that I came up with on my own, is that your teacher teaches you the form, and the form teaches you the Tai Chi. The practice is the teaching. Obviously the teacher has to watch, and when you watch somebody that really knows what they're doing, you can see. But the average person watches a Tai Chi person do good Tai Chi. They don't have a clue what they're really looking at, and because it makes it look so easy, they don't really think there's much to it. But you can see when they show up at class that they're just overwhelmed almost immediately. But that the Fu Yang is a great example, and we don't get usually to do lots and lots of push-hands with all the students, because most of them don't practice, so they come and we're always working on the very beginner stuff. But I always make sure they do 7-star step, and now we're making sure they always do the running thunder fist. We used to just do it hit and miss, and then the other thing for me is, as you practice the form, it evolves. I never wanted my teaching to stop my own progress, so I make sure I practice my forms. The other thing about the students and the teaching is there's a lot of things we tell people at some point in teaching, and then we tell them, this is the way we want you to do it. Well, that applies right up until that no longer applies. Now that's not the case anymore, and you don't do that. But it's very, very, very deep. You got to give these guys credit. Almost 800 years of development and a lot of really, really brilliant people. And I like to kind of, we talk about rehab, injuries, recovery, and prevention. And I just kind of like to imagine what it would have been like 200 years ago or 300 years ago, and you're working for the whoever the emperor is, and you're the Tai Chi guy, and you're doing what you do, and you're out there, and how many of you are going to get injured, and how many of you are going to be dealing with recovery and relief, and you're still going to be a guy who has to go back out and work. The Tai Chi is going to span that whole spectrum.
Yeah. And there's something that I wanted to mention, just to show, another example of how deep it can all go. And I mentioned this to you before we started recording, about a blog post you wrote about 10 years ago, I think. And, I looked it up. I'll put the direct link into the show notes for the listeners. And, you were at a seminar, about, if I'm not mistaken, chiropractic and exercise. And what you wrote is that early on the Sunday morning, you went outside to, do some Tai Chi forms, and somebody started watching you, and he circled around, and he got closer, you got talking to him, and he asked, if you could feel your trunk, your body as you were doing the moves. And then he said, it's all there, isn't it? And that was, Stewart Mcgill, who is actually one of my heroes, Dr. Stewart Mcgill, in what he does about the lumbar spine. All the books that, he's written several books about, injury prevention and how the spine actually works. And his famous, core exercises that he gave, the McGill 3, they're called nowadays, because everybody, I'm talking power lifters, bodybuilders, everybody's doing those because they are so good. He's one of the most, in my opinion, one of the foremost experts on the lumbar spine. He's working with athletes, he's working with, mixed martial artists, professional MMA fighters, and all over the world. And you got to meet the guy and actually apparently impress him.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, it's all there.
Yeah, it was pretty, now here's a guy who could appreciate movement, right? Here's a guy who could appreciate, when he saw our Tai Chi, he could appreciate it. But, it was a seminar. It was a seminar down in SeaTac, and it was part of a certification, sports chiropractic certification program. It was him and a famous chiropractor named Levinson. And they were doing a dual program for the weekend, Saturday, Sunday thing. And he had spent the whole day Saturday teaching, and then I stayed at a hotel, and in the morning, there's park across the street. So in the morning, I wanted to get my forms done. I don't take my saber and my, spear and stuff usually to these strange parks, but I do the hand forms. Anyway, the Sunday thing started at 8, so I was out there pretty early. And it was foggy, kind of off the lake. So I'm just doing my form, and there's really not too many people around. And I did see him coming from around over there, just paying attention. And then when he got closer, he was focused in on watching, and I didn't say anything, and I just kept doing what I was doing. And then I recognized him, and pretty soon he got closer, and he said, do you mind if I watch? I said, no, but I didn't stop. I don't usually stop when that happens until they... It's a different story, but I've been kicked out of a few parks, and usually I eventually stop.
I know.
When they tell me that I got to go, I stop. But anyway, he wanted to talk about it, and I said, yes, Tai Chi, and it's at a Hong Kong, and it's it's a hand form. I was still moving. And he said, well, do you mind if I feel your waist? And I said, no, I don't mind. Go ahead. He's a big shot. You don't say no to Stewart Mcgill. Yeah. And, so he put his hands on my waist, and I kept doing the form, and pretty soon he stepped back and said, it's all there. And I said, yeah, it is. And he asked me about where to find Tai Chi instruction in, I don't know if he's in Toronto or Montreal, but he's somewhere up in that neighborhood. And I told him I didn't really know, and, but I wished him luck. And so I imagine that I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe that it was after that they began to use the phrase soft bracing and incorporate that into his teaching. But it was a good experience for me, and it was a good, you develop, if you're a thinker and you're analyzing stuff and you're trying to pay attention and you're trying to learn and you're trying to be both a student and a teacher, you get out ahead of the evidence occasionally, and you're thinking, you've thought about stuff, and you have your own opinions, right? Well, I thought the Tai Chi was just the most amazing thing I'd ever done, and I think that was at about the point in time where I began to start feeling all kinds of various things inside, for lack of better words, the meditative aspects. But it was during a period of time when I had been doing Tai Chi every single day, all year long, for about 7 years, at the nearby park. So it was an endorsement. The credibility was there, and I felt good about what I was doing to have that guy make that kind of a statement. I want to just brag about one other little thing, if it's okay to brag about one other little thing.
Of course.
In the course of the seminar, we were learning a long series of functional capacity tests. Turns out nobody's really interested in doing them, but they're very, very, very interesting tests. And as we would learn them all through Saturday and all through Sunday, after we would spend time with lecture, he would say, okay, everybody stand up and do the test. And so we were doing all kinds of stuff, crunches and all kinds of various things, including standing on one leg with your eyes closed. And they were timing us, and a wide variety of things. Well, there were about 45 people in the class. The vast majority were quite a bit younger than me. And as we would go through these various things, various percentages of the crowd would just simply be unable to do it. I mean, it's an average group full of the average size shape of people. And so they just couldn't do the test. They just didn't have the physical capacity to do the test. Well, the second day we got through, all the way through it, we got to, I don't know if this was the last test, but this was the test where there were only 3 people standing. There were only 3 people that passed this test. And that was the one-legged standing with your eyes closed. So of all those tests, of all those people, only 3 people, and I'm not 100% sure those other 2 people, were able to do every other test. But I know I was able to do every one of the tests, including stand on one leg with my eyes closed for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And if that's not a testament to Tai Chi, I don't know what is, because there's no other, I don't have any other explanation for it. I certainly wasn't doing anything else that would account for it. And I just thought, well, these are endorsements.
Go ahead. Yeah. I just, one of the things that my teacher does regularly is that, okay, now you're going to do the form eyes closed. That's it. So, and the spatial awareness that you develop and the motor control and balance and coordination, it's if you do that regularly, it does make a difference. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, I mean, and talking about Dr. Mcgill, I mean, again, for you and I, you know who he is, and I'm sure a lot of listeners who aren't really into this kind of stuff, look up Dr. Stewart Mcgill, and I'll put a link in the show notes about some of his books and so on. I mean, he's like a rock star. Let's put it that way. In his field, he's just one of the guys that if you can get a hold of him, and he's one of the people I would love to interview for the podcast, because I know he works with martial artists. Is that if you get an endorsement from somebody like that who says, okay, what you're doing is good stuff, then you know you're good. I mean, that if there's one incentive to keep on training, I mean, that would be it, in my opinion.
I mean, certainly if it wasn't any good, he wouldn't have stopped, looked, had all that to say, and wanted to feel my trunk. And he would have never said that. He doesn't have the kind of ego where he would say that just for the hell of it.
No, I was seriously doubt that.
I think that he recognized the balance, the strength, the coordination, the flexibility, and the relaxation, as well as that soft brace that you just inherently are going to develop.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, it's one of the things that we're talking about, how deep the art can get and the different levels and so on. And I remember the first time, and this is a long time ago, because when I started with my Tai Chi, I was all over it. I mean, I would train a lot and always try to dig deeper and get better. And one of the things that I remember distinctly many years ago, when I first was able to contract my erector spinae muscles on command, just by conscious thought, which was, for me, that was a big breakthrough in body mechanics. And to this day, it's one of the things that I show my students, like, look, okay, this is something that you don't necessarily have to focus on it but this is eventually where I want you to go, to this kind of control, or the way that you retract the shoulder blades, is that all this stuff needs to happen instinctively, automatically, as it is trained, obviously. But I ask them, like, look, contract your biceps. Everybody can do that. Okay, contract latissimus dorsi. Gets difficult. They're like, okay, I have to think about it. There's some eventually get there, but without movement. That was I forgot to say that. Without moving anything in your body, just pick a muscle and contract it. And then we get to the finer ones and the deeper ones, and then everything becomes really difficult. I'm like, and then I tell them, like, look, this is a kind of motor control that you're eventually trying to develop. You don't have to get there right away, but this is one of the things that you can really dig deep into. And that's when our style actually starts to work really well, if you can get to those kind of levels, because you're no longer just working with the prime movers, with the big muscles that power the body, from what we would call an external martial arts point of view. But you get to some of the stabilizers and synergistic muscles and all the different type of systems that are in your body there to begin with, and that you're trying to tap into those to be more effective in the way you move. And then we get to strength generation and defense and offense and movement and speed, power, and it's for me it was a catalyst, understanding how that stuff works and starting to train a whole lot more on that. And then we get to the Neigong, which is what we call Qigong for the people who aren't in that system, which is solo exercises that also have a big, how should I put it, they're a hugely important part of that piece of the puzzle. So anyway, I wanted to mention that because I think it was really amazing that you got to meet Dr. Mcgill in that context specifically, and then get that kind of an endorsement for the style. So I think that's pretty awesome. Well,
it certainly endorses the health benefits, I think. Every time you hear a story about somebody defending themselves one way or the other, it endorses something that they've been doing. I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said about defending against falls and bicycle accidents and motor vehicle accidents. That concentration and the focus, and what the word that they use nowadays, of course, the right word to use is the functionality of it.
Yeah.
We don't have to understand all the minute details, and we certainly don't, some more than others, but if we know that the training produces these results, then we do the training if we want those results. And I think about the women that came to that self-defense class. If they thought they were going to learn anything that was going to be transferable and useful to them in self-defense, I don't know how much better off they were because of those 2 hours. But I do know that if you come to a Tai Chi class, either yours or mine or any of our Tai Chi classes, you're going to gradually develop awareness and capabilities that are bound to be useful to you one way or the other. For example, I had never ever done many of those functional tests that Stewart Mcgill and Liebenson had us do, but I was able to do them.
Yeah.
And even the one-legged standing with your eyes closed wasn't easy by any means. We were allowed 5 attempts, and I think I needed all 5. But because of the Tai Chi's, the crossover, the functionality of it, if somebody wants to go backpacking or somebody wants to go cut firewood or go pick something up or do something, I don't have to think about whether or not I'm going to be okay. I can just go do it. And hopefully that's going to happen if anybody ever tries to take a sucker punch at me.
Well, that brings us back to some of the advice that you see. I think it's in the Book of Five Rings by Musashi. I think he writes it. I forget the phrasing, but like your everyday stance is your fighting stance.
Yeah.
Is that you have, which implies many things, but one of the things it implies is that you're going to have to be able to fight from just standing in a neutral position as opposed to whatever fighting stance you prefer. And incidentally, that's how we start pretty much every single one of our forms, in a neutral stance. This is where you start and then you get moving. And how do you go from being in a neutral stance into whatever movement you want to do next, which is the very first thing you do in our form. So that's lesson number 1. You're going to fight from wherever you find yourself in, and not necessarily from your preferred position. So it all flows into your there's a lot of talk about natural movement these last few years. That's like functional movement and natural movement. That's a lot of stuff that is going on nowadays. A lot of it, in my opinion, is very far-fetched and gimmicky and marketing-driven. But when you look at what we see in the martial arts, and in particular in our style, natural movement sometimes looks a little bit different than what I see other people doing. But I think that's a form of self-defense.
You were mentioning, we talked earlier about a guy doing a deadlift. It all crosses over, and it either is good, solid movement or it isn't. One of the other things I learned from the kettlebell community is when they see a superstar doing something super spectacular, they reverse engineer that and figure out how he's doing it and tie it in. They already know. Yeah. And then train the movement. That's a phrase, train the movement, of the muscle, right? Yeah. So, whether it's Fu Yang or any of those other ones, to me, the brilliance, again, getting back to my world of injury into rehab into recovery, the brilliance of the Tai Chi hand form, and as it progresses right through the other forms, is that every little piece has something to teach, and everything is building you up to be able to do the next thing. I mean, when we get people at the end of the first section of a hand form, and they're the kind of person who didn't really want to do it our way, and they've been sloppily stumbling through the whole form. When they get to that point where they transition into the second section, they just fall apart. They just simply can't do it. If you haven't been doing it correctly up to there, how the hell is your left hip and your right hip going to open and turn and balance and do that move? It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to point out quickly for the people who are listening, if it sounds like this whole episode is one big advertisement for our style of Tai Chi, that's not really our purpose here. But one of the things, obviously, Dennis and I practice the same style, so we're talking shop a little bit. But on the other hand, I mean, one of the things that we have in our style is that at a certain point, you kind of enter into an agreement with the teacher that he's going to teach you correctly, and you're going to be a good student and not be an asshole for one part. But also one of the things that you kind of promise to do is not to trash other styles, and which is one of the reasons why you almost never hear me talk about other styles. And in particular, I hardly ever talk about other styles of Tai Chi. That's why you're hearing Dennis and me only talk about our style of Tai Chi and our classes and so on. We don't talk about the other styles primarily for the reason because we don't practice them. So we're not really in a good position to say anything basically intelligently about it, primarily because they do things very differently from the way that we do them. Which isn't necessarily wrong or right, it's just different, and we're not qualified to comment on them. And that's why you're hearing most of what we've said nowadays is just in this episode is like us talking about this is from our perspective, from the style that we practice, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best, but this is what we do, and we're not going to talk about anything else. Unless obviously, I don't know about you, but I haven't been training in any other styles of Tai Chi, so I'm not going to comment on them. I'm going to leave that to the experts in those fields.
Well, that's exactly how I feel about it, and I try and follow exactly that same kind of policy. But it's like I was telling the students at the college the other day. We got to week number 9, and I had pushed them so hard the first 6 or 7 weeks that they were already at the point they normally are at the end of the quarter. So I told them we could coast through the rest of the class and just kind of take it easy, and they're going to get into finals anyway, and they're going to be stressed out. But essentially, they've achieved all the objectives of the class. But I came. We are on a hard, not really tile, but a hard floor, big room, but a hard floor. And I brought my yoga mat, and I said, one of the things that we do, and if you're ever going to say you're any kind of a martial artist, you're going to have to know how to fall, or probably know how to fall. I mean, we don't want to fall, but you don't want to. And I said to the kids, you don't want to say you're a Tai Chi person and then not know how to fall. So I brought my mat. I'm going to show you a way to roll and how to fall backwards and forwards and talk to you a little bit about that. And if you're interested and you want to, you can come over and we can do a little bit of that. Because not everybody's interested, and it doesn't really matter to me if they all want to do something or not. And I have another guy there that can help them go through the form and do the 7-star step and do the push-ins and all that other stuff they already know. They can fiddle around with that all they want. But I wanted to explain to them that it doesn't matter who you are. There's certain things you need to be able to do. So any other type of martial artist might be able to take quite a bit of what we said and say, you know, well, we have this, and this is how what they're talking about applies to me. You can't do everything, so no matter who you are, you can only do so much. Yeah. But I think falling is one of those things that if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you're going to have to be on the lookout for falling. And if you are going to fall, I think it makes sense to know how to fall without getting hurt. And it's another one of those things, you know, in our system, and I know in many other systems, they train at it and they practice it. And so it's one of those daily things that I do that because it's such a wonderful functional exercise and has so many benefits, it's one of the ones I do. So anybody can kind of apply much of what we've talked about to their work. I mean, there's little details, but, and also what I don't have too much to say about other Tai Chi styles because I actively didn't learn anything about them specifically. Yeah. I mean, other than what my teacher writes, and he's got enough critique for the rest of us, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, bringing it back to what you said about, you know, fall prevention. You know, just a basic self-defense aspect of it is you don't want to fall in a fight. And if you do fall when you have to defend yourself, it would be very interesting for you to know how not to get injured on your way down. And so you can obviously get back up as soon as possible, and keep on defending yourself in an effective manner. So it always ties together with self-defense, and it's all connected. There's no, like Dan, you know, said many times, that I remember, in seminars and elsewhere, that there's no useless movements in the forms and in the style that we do. Everything is there for a reason, or everything has a meaning, everything has a use. So, and the trick is then, I think, as a teacher, is explaining that to the students, what the uses of all those movements are, and how it applies in different contexts, ranging from self-defense to health to conditioning and so on. So, anyway, I think we went way over time because I had a blast talking to you, Dennis. Normally my interviews are like 30 to 60 minutes. I think we went way over time. So I think I'm going to maybe cut it in 2 episodes. I'll see. I can figure that out. I just want to check. I mean, is there anything you want to mention to the listeners, or any pieces of advice or anything that you could share?
Well, we've pretty much. Well, the one thing is I have about 1,200 blog posts on my blog. And anything we've talked about today, there'll be a dozen blog posts on that somewhere on my blog. So if there's any interest, that's a resource for your listeners and anybody that's wants to take advantage of that. And any of your people that are in our style, if they ever get to Everett, they better stop in and say hi.
Excellent. I will obviously put a link to your blog in the show notes, so that people can get that directly. Is there any other website or place that people can get in touch with you?
Well, there is my Everett Tai Chi Chuan website, which is a page off of the blog. But other than that, and my chiropractic site, that's all there is. I don't have a lot of other. I don't have too much else.
Okay, well, I'll put all those links up in the show notes. Then people can, directly go to those pages and look everything up. Like you said, your blog. I mean, I've been reading your blog for a long time, and there are indeed a bunch of, loads and loads of blog posts with interesting stuff in there, covering a lot of what we talked about already, and much more, obviously. So I would very much recommend listeners just browse through the blog, the Dennis's blog, and I'm sure you'll eventually hit something that piques your interest. Okay, well, I think we were extremely thorough in covering every single topic. I enjoyed this a lot. It was fun talking to you guys. It's been way too long. Yeah, and I hope the listeners can get some information about all our talking that we just did and going all over the place. But I prefer it much more, doing an interview like this as opposed to the very rigid and strict stuff that you sometimes have to listen to elsewhere. So that said, thanks again. I very much appreciate your time. If you have any parting words before we sign off.
You talking to me now? I've got my wife talking on my shoulder.
No, it's okay. No, I want to thank you for your time, obviously, and also if any parting words before we. No,
give them a break. They've heard enough. Thank you, Wim. It was quite interesting.
Okay.
This is my first experience with the podcast. We had a lot of fun, and I think maybe we put something out there that somebody can use, which is the most important part of it.
I sincerely hope so. Okay. Well, thank you
very
again,
welcome.
Dennis.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.